And starting off with that theory and practice, Rory, those recorded or an observed skills session, it kind of puts ice into the veins of any student. I remember mine, I was so nervous, and trying to remember what I'd learned and trying to fit all the skills in to make sure I'm ticking all the boxes. Not necessarily the right way to do it, Rory, is it?
No, and yes, I felt the hairs on my neck stiffening as I remembered my recorded skills session. We did ours on a video, I seem to remember, and yes, it was a very challenging experience. Shall we say that? And I think there's so much pressure to record that final submitted portfolio that I've literally seen when I taught students, burst into tears or get very, very stressed out. And I think the secret, if there is a secret to recording this, is practice, Ken. And I think that, certainly when we ran training, we taught, we would get people to practice on a regular basis. I know that you were the skills tutor on the diploma that we taught, but I know that you were very keen that people started practicing their skills from the get-go.
Yeah, I think if it's the first time that you're using a recording device, or the first time that you're recording over Zoom, or the first time that you're recording your skills session, then there's going to be that element of nerves, that maybe unfamiliarity with the recording, that feeling of being watched or monitored as you're going through that process. And like you say, Rory, practice is what irons that out. So there is an opportunity in if you're doing a formal counselling qualification in the United Kingdom, at a certain level, if you're going to be assessed on your skills, you're going to have in-class time to practice those skills, where you're going to break out maybe with peers or something like that. And what I recommend is you start recording as soon as you possibly can, even if you're using a mobile phone, which is not ideal for recording, but it'll do the job, and popping that down, recording your skills and listening back to your skills, or meeting up with colleagues online, perhaps over an online app such as Zoom. We don't recommend any specific apps, but that's just one that I can mention, and maybe recording the skill session there as well. And then watching that back and evaluating your own skill session, having a look at what you're saying, what's coming out, how the flow is going. And if you're recording it on a regular basis in your practice sessions, chances are when you get to the having to be recorded for assessment or being observed for assessment, you're going to feel a lot less nervous about that, because it's something you've done again and again and again. You're going to know how your recorder works. You're going to know all the technical sides of that, so you wouldn't have to worry about that when that time comes, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think that if you are going to record, I personally wouldn't recommend a mobile phone because of issues of confidentiality. Yeah. You don't want to press the wrong button and send the sound file onto Twitter or YouTube or whatever people use, or TikTok, which I believe is very popular. But use a recorder. Usually the organizations have a recorder, and start recording. And what I would say is take the mindset of welcoming feedback, because any set of skills, and I think you can't underestimate this, this isn't one skill. Your skills, it's a skills recording. So you're using a number of skills. They have to be honed. And if you think about, if I think about my first driving lesson, I can remember my driving instructor grabbing the steering wheel and going, no, we're going to have to stop and go through it again, because that's how you learn. You learn by making your own mistakes, and they should be welcomed. Nobody that I've ever met, I've ever taught, maybe with one exception I can think of, could do counselling skills straight off the bat, do a complete session straight off the bat, and it is about, I think, just listening. It can be, I don't know, it can be a bit difficult hearing your own voice, hearing you making mistakes. But that's how you learn. And I think that the more you do it, the more you understand the process of recording, the more you understand what the skill actually asks of you, and what will happen when you apply that skill, the more chance you'll find it's easy to apply that skill when you come to your recorded session. And it comes down to my motto of the more you know, the less you fear. You'll find out the things you need to know by doing lots of recording, getting lots of feedback, and you'll be able to develop, your own particular way of using skills.
Yes. And if you're meeting up and going through this process, recording the skills, doing it online, and I think that there's a benefit in working with some people that you maybe don't know that well as well. So maybe other students that you can, maybe Rory mentioned the Facebook group. You might pop onto the Facebook group. Hey, I'm really looking to do some skills. I'm at level 4. I'm looking for a fellow student to work with. And the reason for that, and even better if you can get into a triad. And the reason for that is you want a person maybe that you don't know observing what you're doing. So if you're in a triad, you've got maybe another student that's also on the same level course of yours, watching what you're doing and feeding back. And it gives you that practice of being observed by another person, so that when it's the tutor observing, you're kind of used to being watched and seen. Now, that's kind of on the nerves kind of things. But if you think about your skills, fitness to practice letter usually comes after the skills have been evaluated. But those skills are like any assignment or exam that you will do. There's going to be a criteria that you need to hit. So it's not just a random use of skills and a random session. Have a look at the criteria. What are you being asked for in your recorded skill session? You're going to have an outline of what the tutor is listening for or looking for if it's on video. And that probably would include, how are you opening that session? How are you starting that session? Are you speaking about confidentiality? Are you speaking about times that you might need to break confidentiality? How long is the session? You may mention that it's being recorded. You may even mention that this is being recorded because it's going to be evaluated by my tutor. You can say it as it is. That's okay. How long will that file be kept for? What will happen to that file when you're finished with that file? So you might say that I will keep the file until my assessment has been done, and then it will be deleted and it won't be kept anymore. Who has access to that file? So you're speaking about basically contracting. You would do verbal contracting. You would mention how long you have within the session. So this is me just going through some of the criteria that you're most likely going to be measured across. You'd then be maybe measured on your rapport building, your minimal encouragers, your active listening. Were you listening? Were you interrupting? And then, of course, the use of skills. It might be silence, it might be reflection, it might be a paraphrase, it might be a summary towards the end of the session. And then you might also be assessed on your ending. How do you end? Do you give an indication that it's coming to an end? Do you ask the client how they are before ending and check if there's a need for a referral? So those are just some of the things to look out for. But best bet is get a criteria, have a look what that is, and when you can, practice your skill sessions with that criteria beside you. So you're practicing it again and again and again. So it's not the first time you're doing it when you're being observed and marked on it.
Yeah, I think there's some really useful observations there, Ken. And I would also say, with my data protection hat on, I've got a data protection hat, so data protection on it, is that if you are going to record anything, you need to be very thoughtful. I would ask your tutor, when Ken and myself recorded and worked with students, it was before the Data Protection Act. I think we finished in 2016 as tutors. And in 2018, the Data Protection Act came along. And I would imagine now that tutors would insist that the information is recorded on college equipment so that they can delete the stuff off themselves. So check that out as well, I think. That's really useful. And also, I would say that you need to know how many skills you need to demonstrate within that usual half-hour session. So most criteria, most exam boards have between 3 and 6 skills. So one of the things that as tutors marking skills is that you could have someone starts off really well and then they only use one skill throughout the entire session. And that's fine, they may use it very well, but that would be a refer because they've not used between 3 and 6. On the other hand, you may get someone who's crammed in every single skill at every single opportunity. And the session sounds disjointed because the person's trying too hard. They're leading the session to get the criteria hit. And the person who's in the role of speaker, as we say when we're training, speaker, or it would be the client, is going to be, pushed to one side. So I think it speaks again to pacing yourself, getting that feedback, and working in the triad. And I want to say something about triads. There is a little bit of a secret when you're working in a triad that sometimes isn't always apparent, and it took me a little time to work out. So a triad is 3 students. One student is in the role of the counsellor. One student is in the role of the client, and sometimes that's referred to as listener and speaker. Exam boards sometimes take a dim view of students using the term counsellor and client. So sometimes it's listener and speaker. And then there's an observer. And at the end, so the observer will take notes and give feedback to the person who's in the role of listener, counsellor. Now, when it comes to feedback, what you should always do is get the feedback from the person who's played the client first. And the reason for that is if you ask for the observer's feedback first, it can influence what the person who's played the client says.
Indeed.
So start with the feedback from the person who is the speaker or the client, and then take the feedback from the observer. And sometimes you may see 2 very different pieces of feedback. Most of the time, in my experience, the observer will be very, very critical, and the person who's been the role of the client will say, that was great. It's really interesting. It can be 2 very different feedbacks.
Yeah. And that triad work is so super powerful. And it's so super powerful, specifically when you're in the role of the observer. When you're in that role of observer, you get to oversee that whole interaction, speaker and listener. You can write down the skills that are being used. You might say use of silence. You might, and you can kind of see the effectiveness of that skill. So silence was used. What happened then? Was it an uncomfortable silence? Did the speaker use that to process and then go deeper into the context of what they're bringing? So you get that, I guess, bird's eye view that you don't always get when you are the listener. When you are the listener, you are in the speaker's frame of reference. You're there with them, and you sometimes the use of the skills is more subconscious of, okay, I used silence over there, and you might be able to hear it by listening back. But as the observer in a triad, really, really powerful. Be the observer as much as you can, because there's lots of learning. You might pick up other people's styles and ways of saying things. How do they top and tail their sessions? Is there anything that you like that you might like to take and play around with within your own sessions? So the other thing to this for me, Rory, is you're talking about passing your recorded skill session. There's 2 parts to the recorded skill session. Part 1 is the actual file. So it's going to be a video or an audio file, or you're going to be observed in person by your tutor who might take notes while that is happening. But there's another part of it as well. There's a written part to passing your recorded skill session, where you may be going to refer back to that session and speak about what actually happened and how that relates to your modality. So let's say, for instance, you now referring to the skills, you might say use of silence. You might then say what silence does. So what does silence do? Well, it sometimes gives space so that the client consider what's going on for them. It lets the client set the pace. And then what happened after the use of that silence? Did the client or the speaker in this case go a little bit deeper into the context, into the narrative, into the feelings behind the narrative? Well, that would indicate a successful use of silence. So name the skills that you are using and describe what the skill does, and then how it acted or what it did, what its role was within the actual session that you held. So I guess that's the other side. What I did was I made myself a master skills list. I wrote down all of my skills silence, paraphrasing, reflection. You know what your skills are. Write them all down, the name of the skill, and then put next to it from the theory, from when you were learning it, what does that skill do? And it usually does something for the client and it does something for the counselor as well. So you look from a client's perspective, what does it do? From a counselor's perspective, what does it do? And it gives you the opportunity to kind of evaluate whether that skill worked well within that situation. And you can, within that written part, saying, on reflection, looking back on this, maybe I shouldn't have used a direct reflection there. Maybe a paraphrase would have been a better use of skill, and here's why. So it gives you that opportunity. So there are two parts to passing your recorded skill session.
Yes, and I think Ken's laid that out beautifully. And I guess one final plea, and I think tutors will probably manage this, but be very thoughtful if you are the speaker, or the person in the role of client, what you bring. I think that you need to be, I think that probably tutors would brief that if you're going to use, if you're going to be the speaker, the person who's in the role of client, to bring something that's a bit benign, not deep material, because this isn't counselling, this is counselling skills. And, what I've seen when I was a tutor was that it's very, very easy to get out of your depth as a student. You're working with someone, all of a sudden they're telling you about their life story, and you're literally opening someone up. One of the exercises I used to do was something called "What's in your pocket, what's in your bag," and I just get the students to take something out of the pocket. Could be a set of car keys, and the exercise would be just tell the person in the role of counsellor, the listener, what these keys are and what they mean to you. And you'd be amazed what a rich session you could get out of a set of car keys, or I don't know, whatever's in someone's pocket, some loose change, or a wet wipe or something like that. You'd be surprised. And it's pretty benign. And, I'm sure that tutors, are very, very aware of making sure that what's being discussed isn't going to re-traumatize or put someone in a place where they maybe don't have support. They have a half an hour skill session, they've opened themselves up, and then they don't have any support. So I'm sure that all tutors who listen to this are very aware and manage that very well, Ken.
Yeah, when you're going in as the speaker, think carefully of what you bring. Very, very much so. You don't want to be opening stuff up within yourself. And also you're working with somebody that is training. You're not there in therapy. It's not there may be, I think, Rory, for me, a therapeutic outcome or impact that comes from practicing skills sessions, but it is not therapy. Yes. It isn't therapy. It is a practice. As you say, Rory, bring something that is benign. I like that wording. You drive to the university before where you got angry in traffic because somebody cut in front of you, that kind of stuff. It's okay. It's superficial. It's surface. It's everyday. It's run of the mill. And there's plenty of emotions and materials in just a normal day-to-day interaction. I know I certainly go through a number when I'm journaling. I kind of go back on the day and I see a number of emotions that come up there.